Hello and welcome to the Stata crash course. This is day one, getting started. My name is Justin Wiltshire. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Economics at the University of California, Davis. And I will be your instructor for this course. So let's get started. First of all, why Stata? So most of you have had some exposure to Stata, but you might ask, well, why are we using Stata? And the reasons are myriad. It's widely used by economists to perform empirical analysis. So that leads to a number of other benefits. The syntax is relatively straightforward. That may not always be true of other pieces of software. For those of us who are not computer scientists or willing to spend even longer learning syntax, it's quite nice. The help files, they're actually quite helpful. Some of these other pieces of software, down at the bottom I mentioned R, MATLAB, and Python. Sometimes their help files can be quite complex, and I have found not always particularly helpful. Stata's help files are usually quite helpful. You can open them, read them, and you can normally figure out what it is that the command does and how to use it. Big one, there are lots of responses to questions from a simple Google search. So if you just type into Google or your search engine of choice, Stata, and then some point form version of a question, chances are someone has already asked this question and the answer is somewhere online, normally on the first page of results. And that's very nice. And you are going to want to do that a lot. In this course, I'm going to give you a lot of commands, but there are a lot of other commands that you will not have seen. And a lot of these ones you'll forget. Oh, wait, how do we do that? Or what if I want to modify it to work for my purposes in a way that Justin didn't explain? Google it, or again, some other search engine. It's going to be very helpful for you. And finally, and this goes back to being widely used by economists, you can generally get help from colleagues or instructors with Stata. That may not always be true with the other programs. For example, MATLAB is not necessarily well known except by macroeconomists. Microeconomists, applied microeconomists, don't really use MATLAB for the most part, and so we're not going to be able to help you if you say, how do you do this thing? R, some people are going to be able to help you with. R, a lot of people actually say, is more versatile than Stata, and it's open source. I believe it's free. You can learn it from a number of courses online. So you may wish to learn R at some point, but it's also more complex, especially with the syntax. And yeah, people aren't going to be able to help you as much. And Python obviously is widely used by a lot of people, but a lot of economists don't necessarily use it. For web scraping, R and Python are much more versatile and helpful, but again, maybe a little bit more complex. That is not going to work. Okay. So the course syllabus and some supplementary materials are going to be available at this website I've put together. At some point, hopefully, they'll be available on Canvas sooner rather than later, optimally, if this video series is quick to edit. But regardless, you can go to this website now, and you can find a few basic things that we're going to need. As I mentioned in emails, we're going to assume that you understand basic stats and econometrics. To the extent that you're lost on something, please just ask, even if it's during the break. But there is going to be some sense that, for example, you know what a regression is. I'm not going to explain what we're doing when we do simple OLS regression, but for more complex things, I will explain them. We're going to present a lot of commands. So it's going to cover all sorts of topics: exploring data, manipulating data, simple and advanced regression, and a lot of these commands you're going to forget because they're just too many to memorize. And the point is not for you to memorize them. The point is for you to see them and to work with them. And I'm going to have you guys type out everything that I type out and create your own do files so that you've got a record that you've created yourselves, which you can refer back to, which will be quite helpful, hopefully, when you want to type your own code. And also, just because you're going to be doing it, that whole learning by doing way of gaining knowledge is going to be reinforced. For the first 2 days, we're going to use slides and Stata. We're going to switch back and forth. It is going to crowd the screen a bit, but it's useful for us to be able to do that. You're going to be able to see me type the things, and then after day 2, on day 3 and 4, we're going to actually just work in Stata, and you're going to see me just type out the do code, and as we go, we'll talk about things. Are there any questions so far? Great. If you do have questions at any point, please just let me know. So as I said, the slides will cover material from days 1 and 2, and for days 3 and 4, that will be only in do files. Those will be put on the website and eventually on Canvas. And the video lectures, as I said, will also be there. If you, in the future, have some desire to learn some other commands, or you just found that something I explained was not particularly clear and you want to go over it in a different instructor, you can check out these 2 video series. They're both helpful. I think I learned my basic stuff for Stata from this one from UCLA. But the reality is you're never going to be able to learn Stata better than by using it. And as you use it more and more and more, you're going to learn more and more. And I still learn things, and I've been using it for, I don't know, like 9 years. So, you know, hopefully you guys are little econometricians and will go and write good code, and you'll eventually become expert in Stata yourselves. Obviously, everyone here has a copy of Stata, but for those online, if you don't have a copy of Stata, you will need to get one, and you can look at this website right here. Okay, so let's open Stata. You can just type Stata. I have Stata 15. You may have an earlier version, but it should not cause too much of an issue at this point. So, let's look at a few things here. First, you're not going to be able to see all that much right now, but when you open this and you have done something, in this space right here, you will see a log of the commands that you have typed. There's nothing there now because we have not typed anything. Over here, once you've loaded data, you will see a list of all of the variables that you have with their names and any labels attached to them. If you click on one of those variables in here, then in this section right below, you're going to end up seeing some descriptive statistics. For example, the name, any labels attached that you can't see here, the type, the formatting, etc. If you look down here, once we've loaded data, you will get the sort of basic information about the data, the number of variables, the number of observations, how big it is. You'll find all of that down here. And again, we're going to see this once we've actually loaded data. It'll be more clear, but just to give you a sense of what's going on for now. Up here, you've obviously got these drop-down menus. In general, we are not going to use these. We are going to be typing our commands and creating do files. You can do this point-and-click stuff. And if you don't know a certain command, you can click on it, go through, and then the code for it will actually pop up here. And then you can use that in your do files. You've got your command line down here. This is where we're going to be typing few of our basic commands when we're not working in our do files. So in general, we are not going to want to use the command line except to do sort of basic exploratory analysis, sort of the very first pass at things, or to test a command. Maybe we're not quite sure how a command is going to work and we want to do that, or for example, to find the help file for a command. And for that, the command line will be useful, but in general, we're going to work with do files, and we'll get to that shortly. And finally, you're going to see all of the things you input and all the output pop up right here. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to go over some basic commands. Then we're going to learn how to explore data in a basic way. We're going to go over some best practices then before we come back and learn how to import different types of data sets. And then we'll end. And we're going to have a break in the middle of it. So basic commands. Stata has a very basic command syntax. Essentially, whatever command you want to use, you type the command, and then it is not always necessary, but in general, you are going to want to apply that command to some variable or set of variables. So you type the command, then you type the variables for which you want it to apply, and then if you want, you can comma and add some options. Anytime you see something like this, especially on this page, in square brackets, it means just that it's optional. You don't have to include this in a command. And the square brackets themselves do not need to be typed. There are times when we are going to use square brackets in Stata, but in general, you do not type square brackets. So this is just to sort of let you know that this is an optional thing for you to do. Bit more advanced syntax. Advanced is sort of maybe not quite the right word, but it's more complex than the basic syntax. It just adds different things. For example, if you want to add an if command to or an if option to any command, we can put some conditional on something. Or you might say in, you might add a wait, etc. And we will see this in action shortly. If you aren't certain about something, type help and then the command name. If you don't know how to do something, that's probably your best bet at first. If then you're like, okay, I understand the command itself, I'm just not quite sure how to use it like this, and the help file doesn't quite tell me, then maybe go to Google, ask one of your colleagues or an instructor. You can just type help, and it will essentially tell you how to use help files in Stata. But yeah, you generally want to type help and then some command name. So what I'm going to do, the practice I'm going to follow throughout these slides is to include any Stata command or variable name with sort of a typewriter font. If you guys can tell, that's not the same font as here, and that's going to hopefully help you differentiate between just stuff I'm saying in a general sense and an actual Stata command or a set of Stata code. And finally, allowable abbreviations. So Stata does not require you to type out every command completely. A lot of the time, you're going to say, like, I just don't want to, type summarize every time. Maybe I want to type sum, and Stata is going to say, okay, I know what you mean. I'm going to do that. You can type out the full command, and there's nothing wrong with that. Often I type out part of the command, maybe a bit more than is necessary just for clarity, especially when I go back over my own do files. I want to know quickly what it is I'm doing. I don't want to have to puzzle out the difference between describe or distinct or something like that, so I'm not going to use it. Now we're going to jump right into using Stata here. The very first thing I want you to try doing is just using Stata as a simple calculator. In fact, this is something that can be quite useful if you don't have a little calculator right beside you when you're doing things, and maybe you want to know, what is 238,312 divided by 14.7, and you don't want to pull up the calculator on your computer or go on Google and type that in. You can just type that into Stata. But remember, we said that we need to have a command and then whatever we're going to do. So if you tried to type something like 2 plus 3, Stata is going to say, I don't know what you're doing. The very first thing that I see is 2, therefore that's got to be a command, I guess, but 2 is not a valid command name, so I don't know what you want to do. So instead of doing 2 plus 3, we're going to actually tell Stata that we want to display 2 plus 3, and you can just type DI, or you can type fullness of display, and we'll type all of it the very first time. And there we have the input, 2 plus 3, and we have the output, the result of 2 plus 3, which is equal to 5. You don't just have to do simple math, you can also find the natural log of 1, which is 0. You can find the square root of 2, or you can actually use display to get Stata to display text. For example, hello world. And it all seems pretty straightforward. We're not generally going to use display for much other than using Stata as a calculator. Can't see a whole lot of value to it for the most part, except when perhaps you want to, in some very long file where maybe you're looping over a number of commands, you want to display what exactly is going on so that you can see it on the screen, or it's captured in your log file very quickly, which, for example, variable you're looping through at any given point. But for the most part, we're only going to use this to make sense of some of the capabilities of Stata. We can also input non-variable data into Stata. For example, we may want to record scalars. So you can do SCA or SCLAR. It's not going to allow that because we didn't put the equal sign in. We can also do H2 equals to 24 in quotation marks. Both of these are going to be accepted. Now you might ask, okay, well, what can we do with this? Well, we can see, for example, what age is, or what age 2 is, using SCA or scalar list, and then the name of the scalar. You can see with age 2, the quotation marks do not appear there. We don't have to use scalar list and then the name of it. We can also just call it using display again. For example, age or age 2, and again the quotation marks do not appear when we use age 2. Now I am going to caution you right now, we aren't generally going to work with scalars. We're going to instead work typically with local macros, but we're just going to learn a little bit about scalars right now before moving beyond them. You can also input scalars into strings. So here what we're going to do is put in quotation marks, Johnny is space. Then we're going to have to close the quotation, so Stata knows it should not just display whatever is written there in order to call the scalar age before opening it back up again, putting another space, and then years old. So we did, for example, Johnny is age years old. And we hit enter. With display at the beginning of that, then we get Johnny is 24 years old. We can also do math with scalars. So for example, di age divided by 3, which calls the scalar age, which represents 24. So 24 divided by 3 is 8. However, if you try to do this with age 2, remember we input it with quotation marks around it, it's a string, it's not numeric. So if we try to do math with it, as we will right here, Stata is going to say, I don't know what you're asking me to do. I can't divide some word by the number 3. It doesn't make any sense. And Stata is essentially treating age 2 as a word. It's a string rather than being numeric of some sort. You can also do some other things, for example, age plus 4, which is going to be 24 plus 4, 28. But if you try to do age 2 plus 4. Remember, Stata knows that it is a string, so it's not going to know how to add these. And you could also do, for example, age 2 plus 4, but Stata is not going to know what is going on here because it can't treat age 2 as a number. It's going to not even note that it's a scalar. In fact, it's just going to put the text age 2 and then it's going to put a 4 after it. So this is not age 24 but age 2 4. And the scalar age 2 has not been called. Similarly, if we tried to call, for example, age, we would just get age 4 instead of age 2 4. We can clear all of these out of Stata's memory just by typing clear all. Once we've done that, if you try to call it, it's going to say the scalar is not found because Stata has cleared it from its memory. As I said, we're not going to work with scalars in general. Stata sometimes, not often, but does occasionally do some funny things with scalars, and because of that, it is best not to work with them in general unless needed. We're going to work with macros instead. So I'm not going to go into great depth about macros at this point. What I am going to say is macros are user-defined abbreviations for objects. Only use local macros. There are a few different types. We're only going to use local macros right now, except in special circumstances. And we will today use one global macro, and we'll let you know a few different types of macros tomorrow and in the following days. But for now, you just want to keep in mind that we're generally going to use local macros. So we are going to call locals by surrounding them with these two symbols. And we're going to talk about calling them before we actually show you how to define them. These two symbols are different. You may think, oh, well, that's just going to be a single quote and another single quote. No, this symbol right here on most US and Canadian keyboards is going to be found right under the escape key, on the same key that you'd see a tilde, and it is called a backtick or a grave accent. Grave accent, not sure. Either way, it is what we are going to use on the left-hand side of any local name anytime we call it. And on the right-hand side, we are going to put a single quote. So let's see how this looks. Let's define local age and local age 2 both as 24. Now, unlike with scalars, we do not necessarily need to put an equal sign, but we can. Let's even define local age 3 as 24. Or you could type out 24 here. Either way, it's up to you. Now let's call these. First let's call age. So remember we put that backtick or grave accent, age, we get 24. We can also call age 2, 24. If we try to call age 3, we'll also get 24. What if we then try to define local age 4 equals 24. Call that age 4. In this case, 20 is not found. Let's also try surrounding this in quotes. For example, age in double quotation marks on either side. And here we see it just prints 24. Unlike with the scalars, where when we surrounded the scalar age with quotations, we just got the string, the text, age, age, written out, because Stata did not know at that point that we were trying to call the scalar, because it was surrounded in double quotation marks. Here, because we surround it on either side, we're surrounding the local, when we call it on either side with the backtick and the single quotation, Stata knows even in quotation marks that we're calling it. So, for example, if we wanted to write Johnny is 24 years old, we can call age purely within the double quotation marks. We don't have to close them and then put age and then reopen them, because Stata knows that age is a local here. You can also rewrite or overwrite macros very easily. Local macros can just be rewritten by redefining them. So now I say local age 27 and I call local age and I get that again. And if you want to see it changed here as well, you can in fact you can double click over here and you get that, or you can just Control R on your keyboard. That'll bring back the last command that was executed. If you keep going back, you'll get previously executed commands. We see Johnny is whatever age is defined to be years old. You can do math these, for example, age divided by 3. Remember 27 rather than 24 is what age is now. So of course 27 divided by 3 is 9. And if you try to divide age 3 by 3, and remember we defined age 3 as quote 24, it is going to work. But if you try to ask it to divide age 4, which we wrote out as 24 by 3, it is not going to be able to do that. So it's just a few ways of working with local macros, and we're going to see in the future a little bit today, but especially tomorrow and the next day, when locals can come in very, very handy. So keep it in the back of your mind. We're not really going to use them too much more today. The one other thing I'll say is if you want to clear a macro, you can just redefine it but not write anything afterward, in which case, oops, when you call it, nothing is going to come up. Now, one thing worth noting, we're going to be learning to work with do files today. Locals, when they are executed in do files, are only retained in Stata's memory as long as the do file is running. And once the execution is completed, Stata is going to drop them from its memory. You cannot recall them. This is in contrast to, for example, globals, where even after you have finished executing a do file where they are defined, globals can be still called. They remain in Stata's memory. But this thing that will happen with locals when being run out of do files is not the same thing that happens when we are typing in our command bar. Obviously we had to define all of our locals and then hit enter, so the execution completed, and then we called them afterward. So they remain in Stata's memory when you define them in the command bar. If you clear and then call, for example, age 2, they are still going to remain there. Once you close Stata, for example, and then reload it, if you try to call them, you will not be able to.